My name is Johannes von Moltke. I'm the director of CREASE here at the University of Michigan. And other than that, I have very little role to play here because this event was organized by two of our students. And I just want to express my delight and genuine pleasure at being part of this. It is one of the things that I enjoy most about this job is seeing the initiatives that come actually from students, and in this case from the undergrads, but also in the MA program and PhD students. It's really exciting to see what kinds of initiatives come up this way. Today, that has led to a discussion that I'm very much looking forward to on being queer in Russia, a conversation about challenges facing Russia's LGBTQ plus movement. This would probably be true at any moment, but it seems to me that right now all eyes are on Russia in ways that they aren't always, but they certainly are intermittently. The discussion is brought to you by, as I said, two undergraduate students, Rachel Merritt and Kyle Arnasos. And I'm going to introduce them in a minute, but want to just give you an idea of the framework for this. Both of them are Russian language and culture majors, and they organized this as part of their project called Bridging the Gap Between LGBTQ plus communities in Russia and the United States, which they undertook under the auspices of the CREASE and Ford School initiative called Developing Future Leaders in U.S. Russia relations. That's one of those titles you give those big projects that you dream up, and then they get filled by initiatives like this and really take on life only when something like this happens. So I'm really excited about that. If other students happen to be on this call and are interested in doing something like this, they should see the CREASE website for more details of how to propose such a student-initiated project. The next deadline, I should say, is February 5th. So, I see that Liz is just putting the link to that in the chat. So please feel free to check that out. Under this program, U of M students can design and pursue short-term, approximately 1 week experiential learning projects, focusing on cultural, economic, social, and political issues of importance to the US-Russia relationship. And I couldn't think of anything more important to kick this off. I'm very much looking forward to this conversation, and we'll hand it over to the two moderators, but we'll introduce them first. So Kyle is an undergraduate senior studying Russian and history. During his time at Michigan, he's enjoyed participating in fundraising for an education nonprofit, Pencils of Promise, and participating in a University of Michigan-based Russian translation collective. His motivation in this project is driven by his interest in the achievement of equal rights for LGBTQ plus groups everywhere. His plans for postgraduate studies include graduate school in Russian studies and teaching English abroad. Go, Kyle. Rachel Merritt is an undergraduate senior studying Russian and international studies with a concentration in Eastern Europe and the Middle East. She's passionate about advocacy for repressed minority groups and social justice, and would like to continue on to either a career in international law or as an international policy advisor in a think tank or consulting firm in Washington. Go, Rachel. Rachel wants to continue to learn more about Russian culture and politics along the way and hopes that she can bring a more empathetic and well-rounded perspective to US-Russia international relations. The future is in good hands, and I'm going to pass this on to the two of you. Thanks again for being here. I'm going to disappear for now and then reappear later.
Great. Well, thank you so much for that introduction. You make our future sound very bright. Gives me some hope. So for those of you who are joining and haven't gotten a chance to look at the panel flyer, I'll give a brief overview of what the panel's goals are. So this panel seeks to enable a better understanding of the identities and viewpoints of members of Russia's LGBTQ plus community. And we wanted to place a special emphasis on incorporating the experiences of Russian diaspora and regional voices. Our panelists have all been selected due to their unique representation of these groups and their histories of outstanding activism for the Russian LGBTQ plus community. So the panel will consist of 4 main sections that will hopefully spark a dialogue around these key issues relating to identity formation, experiences, and varying forms of activism, in hopes of forming a more unified and international understanding of the Russian LGBTQ plus movement. So thank you everyone who's tuning in from home on Zoom. I invite you during the panel to think of any questions you might have, as there'll be a brief Q&A section in the end where you can ask those questions.
Great, thank you, Professor Von Moltke. Thank you, Rachel, for those introductions. And good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I know it may be difficult for some of us that are joining from different time zones where it might not be the afternoon right now, but it's amazing that today's world allows us to hold an event like this where everyone can be scattered from across the globe and join in one place. And now we'll begin our introductions for the panelists. And our first panelist, Anastasia Fedorova, originally from St. Petersburg. She's lived in London for the previous 9 years. She's a writer and curator and regularly contributes to many European English language newspapers and magazines. She currently works as a strategy and partnership manager at the Calvert Journal, a London-based publication for culture and travel. Anastasia contributes to LGBTQ+ content curation at the Calvert, and she's covered an impressive number of stories on queer culture in Eastern Europe, particularly in Russia. She's the founder of Russian Queer Revolution, a platform for LGBTQ+ creatives from Russia, which she started last year in 2020. And thank you, Anastasia, for being here today and joining us in this discussion.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Our second panelist today is Lyosha Gorshkov. Hi, Lyosha. He is the co-president at Rusa LGBT, an organization based in New York City that provides support to asylum seekers and organizes social events to increase acceptance of LGBTQ+ people within the Russian-speaking public. In addition to this accomplishment, Lyosha also founded Brighton Beach Pride, which is the first Russian-speaking pride in the United States, which is awesome. And in 2017, the first pride took place. So Lyosha has a background in academia, as well as a former political science professor at Perm State University in Russia. And in 2014, as a result of his vocal advocacy, he was forced to seek asylum in the United States. And currently, Lyosha works at Slippery Rock University in Pennsylvania. Lyosha, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Great. Our next panelist, Alla Chikinda, currently resides in Yekaterinburg in Russia, which is her home city. And there, she's the regional representative and communications manager for the local LGBTQ+ resource center. This resource center provides a safe space for LGBTQ+ individuals to congregate and form a strong interconnected community. This organization also hosts informational meetings, takes part in organizing pride activities, and implements social and legal programs and services aimed at overcoming discrimination of the LGBTQ+ community. Over the past 2 years, the center has found many allies and partners among local NGOs, cultural organizations, and businesses. Alla believes that a representation of Russian LGBTQ+ identities outside of Moscow and St. Petersburg is essential in forming a more comprehensive and inclusive community. And thank you, Alla, for all of your efforts in expanding LGBTQ+ visibility and integration. And of course, thank you for being part of this conversation today.
All right, and our last panelist for today, Ezra Erickson. Welcome, Ezra. He's the digital director at Rusa LGBT. And he has used his expertise in social media marketing to lead initiatives that advocate for LGBTQ+ rights both in Russia and across the globe. Notably, Ezra has contributed to the development of the Illuminator Project, which is an initiative designed to raise awareness about gender identity and sexual orientation among Russian-speaking parents. Ezra moved to the United States in 2017 after his coming out resulted in threats from relatives. Ezra, thank you so much for your leadership in your community, and welcome to the panel.
Happy to be here. Thank you so much.
Great. So really quickly before we begin the panel, I'd like to share a map to give the audience an understanding of the current location of each of our panelists. So give me 1 second. I'm going to share. So in this image, you can see the place of origin and the current place of residence of each of our panelists, which are listed at the left. And so all of our panelists who have graciously gathered here today for this important conversation are joining us from a variety of places from around the globe. We think that noting these backgrounds will give the audience context for each of these panelist experiences, which we find pertinent to developing a bond of mutual understanding on entering this discussion. So give everyone a second to look at the map. Great. And now, without further ado, let's begin our panel. So the first topic for discussion will be discussing the panelists' personal and professional experiences with Russian LGBTQ+ identity formation. And the first question for this topic: what makes Russian LGBTQ+ identities distinct and unique based on your own personal experience or from working within various Russian LGBTQ+ communities? This can be in comparison to conceptions of Western LGBTQ+ communities, or looking within the different regional, academic, diaspora, or activist communities that represent a diverse array of identities and perspectives within the Russian LGBTQ+ community itself. Lyosha, when we last spoke, you had some very interesting insights relating to this topic of identity formation. So if you wouldn't mind, would you like to begin the discussion?
Absolutely. Thank you for having us. It's amazing. And especially while we're talking during the International Holocaust Remembrance Day, and we know that it's still relevant because the concentration camps exist in Chechnya, Chechen Republic, for LGBTQ people. I will say that the Western perception of queer absolutely does not work in Russia. So we've tried to adapt, we've tried to project. And when I began actually in 2005 to study and professionally study queer, we didn't have even the vocabulary for queers, LGBTQ. We had F word, we had some jargon, some prison jargon. And surprisingly, a lot of people have not been identified with that Western concept. I know that time changed, but for certain generations, it's still very complicated. So whatever happens on in the West, right? So we cannot say it should be the same in Russia. So for Russian queer community or LGBTQ+ communities, I rather should say, it has to be the process of self-identity first before we try to stop them with those absolutely nonsense, as they will say. And being in Perm, for example, in Solikamsk, from a very small town in Solikamsk, growing up in the 80s and 90s, we even did not have any perception on gender. So that's why the West tries to say, we have to be all equalized. We have to be this way or other way around. But first of all, we have to see the political and cultural concept and cultural context of the Russian identities. And unfortunately, a lot of people who immigrate and to the United States, for example, queer people, they're very homophobic, transphobic, sexist, misogynist, because Russia still is a country of patriarchal order, is a country of the conservative values. And even if you are gay, you're white gay, you will be absolutely misogynist and sexist towards other identities. So the first step, it should be to see that we are all combined from the flesh and blood. But even in this, being in the Western countries, a lot of people never will get that idea of queerness, that idea of separation of different identities, because that's how we built. And for us, we struggle within Rus LGBT as well to breach those divisions, because Russia is a multicultural country, is a poly-conventional country, poly-religious country, right? So it's very hard to distinguish. That's why I think that in my own concept, which I presented 2 years ago, that queer is dead as a concept. Queer is not working. Queer is an academic projection. Queer is a fashion trend right now, because a lot of people who project on themselves being queer, they're not queer, they're typical gays. So that's why, in order to understand, you have to simply kind of express that view and explain to the audience. But I hope in certain years, we will see some progress on the Russian soil. At least we can find some unique identity, which will be probably not Western, but our own Russian speaking, I would say.
Can I make a comment to that? First of all, I thought that was the most difficult questions of all, which happened to be the first one, because yeah, it really is not an easy question, but I think from my personal experience, I'm probably a little different from everybody else present here, because my coming out and my kind of formation of my queer identity actually happened largely abroad, because I identify both as queer and bisexual. So for me, it's basically a slightly different situation. Whether if I stayed living in Russia, it'd probably just be closeted for life, I can imagine, which was a completely different situation in London. But basically, I started working with queer Russian issues and queer Russian identity because I couldn't quite find an identity for me which existed in London and in an international context, because there was more or less distinct identity for white queer people of Western origins and for queer people of color. But I obviously wouldn't really fit in any of those. And this kind of the fact that I had to again and again explain what my experience was made me think, oh, maybe I should just write about it more and find more people who have similar experience and we can like come up with something together. And the interesting point I have to make about what Lyosha said, I find it interesting about how queer, is queer even relevant as a term. I find it interesting working with a lot of younger queer people in Russia that, and generally, I guess, writing about these topics, that LGBTQ plus term seems to be really separated from queer as a term, because Russian culture has a lot of inherent queerness in it. Like if we look at theater, if we look at Philip Kirkorov, or if we look at some other things, you know, which are really much part of us, they're completely separated from LGBTQ plus political issues. And this separation, I think, very much existed in the late 90s, early noughties. And that I find really interesting, that only recently, I think, they started coming together in people's consciousness, and especially young people. And I find that people are definitely looking for like some authenticity at the moment and their own language and their own identity, which is non-Western, and it's interesting.
Great, thank you. I'd be curious. So, Alla, from within Russia, is your experience of identity? Do you think of it differently than sort of how Anastasia and Lyosha presented it, or yeah, how do you view this question?
I don't know, actually, well, I would agree with Anastasia that this first topic is maybe the most difficult one among all. And well, when I first read this question and when we talked with you about it in advance, I was rather inclined to say that there is no specific like Russian LGBTIQ identity, that because we live in this in the modern world, like with the internet and all like the access to different information from different countries, I tend to think that young people, generally speaking, like are more, well, not the same, but more or less have the same view on things. So I would say that I think I agree with Lyosha about the internalized homophobia and sexism and misogyny among LGBT community in Russia. But I would say that it's more about older people, like people maybe older 30 or 40, who were actually born in Soviet times. But the young generation of people like around 20, I think that I don't see much difference between Russian LGBTIQ or queer youngsters and like Western ones.
Maybe I could add a little more to that. I think that Russian queer identities are like as unique as Russia itself, because Russia is like extremely large country, like very diverse in many ways, and so are queer identities. So I don't think that it's possible to generalize, and I don't think it's very it's correct to speak of Russian queer identity. I mean, if we are speaking of people living in Moscow, it's one thing. If it's Tatarstan, which is primarily Muslim region with its own culture and traditions, and it's another thing. But I grew up in Dagestan, which is primarily Muslim as well. But at the same time, sometimes I feel like it's even more collectivistic than Bashkortostan or Tatarstan. So it's a third thing. But at the same time, Dagestan is like next to Chechnya, but Chechnya is mono-ethnic region, and everything is under control of one person, who is basically a fascist dictator, that kills people. But in Dagestan, I don't think that situation is possible, because there are like more than 15 ethnic groups, and they have to like somehow manage and coexist, because they do business with one another. And I don't think that the rule of one person is possible in Dagestan, and that affects the way people see themselves, see others, how they think of themselves. And this can be applied to queer people as well. But at the same time, all of this is happening in one space, which is homophobic, absolutely, because the policies, the politics, the tone of the discussion is defined in Moscow, and Russia is for sure like patriarchal, homophobic, transphobic country. But if we look at different like regions, traditions, and maybe smaller groups of people and communities, it just ranges, like the level of homophobia or self-acceptance, or I don't know, friendliness. It all depends on which part of the country we are talking about. And when people move from Russia to any other country, even to the US or Europe, their mindset moves with them. So I mean, it just happens that people with all these different backgrounds end up in, like, I don't know, in New York, for example. And how can they be together as a community if they are so different? And that is the problem that we cannot find a solution for that can be like acceptable for everyone. It's really hard.
Okay, thank you. In connection to sort of the homophobic area that a lot of identities are formed in Russia, I talked to some mostly panelists that were in former diaspora communities, so Lyosha, Ezra, and Anastasia, about sort of trauma that's experienced from within cultural-related repressions. So my question is, in your own experience, have you felt the need to disconnect from Russian identity through cultural or language items in order to process trauma caused by country-related repressions? And a tag on to that, is there value in reconnecting back with this maybe a foundational, maybe not a unidimensional ethnic Russian background, like you said, Ezra, there's many different ethnicities, but sort of the Russian background cultural? I'll open up to anyone.
That's a very good question, because personally, I'm still trying to disconnect, because I do not feel and never will feel Russian, because we are German descent and we ended up in exile in 20s during the Stalin purges. And that was kind of ingrained in my mind, even though it was a big secret for my self. My grandmother never mentioned till her death that we were Germans, but somehow it related to me, and I was estranged from the Russian culture from the beginning. So when I got to the United States, of course, the first what you do, you try to reconnect, because that's the only way. You don't know language, you don't speak the language, you don't know anything about the country, and only resource you have is some people who probably still within the diaspora. You get to diaspora and you realize, mamma mia, that diaspora frozen in times even worse than Moscow community or St. Petersburg community. And you go to Brighton Beach in United States and you feel like, I was born in 80s. I don't know if you know, you're very young. So I remember that Soviet times, that absolute kind of community and weird community. and everybody wants to know everything, gossips, rumors, and some kind of, not with the positive attitude, but very negative. And of course, at first year, I was too negative to anything related to Russia. I never watched, I never looked, I never listened to any Russian music, any Russian books, anything. So I totally disconnected. But I was within the community and immersion as a leader, one of the leaders within the diaspora. Of course, you working with a lot of people. Now I'm more flexible in that sense, but I know only one thing, that for me to speak English much more, much easier now than to go back to the Russian language, or to go back to, because I guess after 6 years, after some years we've been living here, we by default, by proxy, cannot anymore relate to that culture. We don't live in that country anymore. We do not reconnect with all of those cultural paradoxes, right? So, and when we see people here, a lot of them more radical than myself. They never speak to Russians, never go to Russian gay community because they are weird. Never date Russian, never get married to Russian, because that's a kind of trauma. And I've experienced trauma, but it's not like I wanna buy that. My trauma is much more deeper than being gay or queer, right? So, but it's a very typical here and within our community, but eventually people still get back because they miss something. It's not nostalgia about the birches and blue rivers and mountains, that bullshit which intelligentsia in 20th century created. No, it's a kind of something common sense, something that you were carefree during your childhood in your country. So that's what we try to hang up to, because it's part of us. We are struggling here and we want to get back to that oasis and paradise we once experienced.
I can add a little bit to that too. After we moved to the US in 2017, I think for the first year, I mean, our first goal was to find a place somewhere else, not in Brighton Beach, not on the Sheepshead Bay or elsewhere at the bottom of Brooklyn. We wanted to get away from from those communities as far as possible. And then we avoided meeting or connecting on a deeper level with Russian-speaking people because we were afraid that we could get stuck in that bubble. Just get too comfortable speaking Russian while being in the US, and I didn't want that to happen. And I remember I found an English teacher that was in Ukraine, and I was taking English classes with her. But like everybody else in my real life was I don't know, either American or immigrants, mostly immigrants, because I was living in Williamsburg back then, which is super diverse, young, and there are lots of different people from all over the world living. So yes, I can totally relate to that, but at the same time, I feel like it's just healing. I needed some space. I took that time, and after that, when I was like, okay, now I'm ready to accept reality, and then I went to the Brighton Beach Pride. I don't know, I sometimes now go to Brighton Beach and get Russian food or something, and I try to support other people who move there from our community. But yes, it's just, I understand why it may be hard for so many people, because you are moving to the US to get away from that mentality, and it doesn't make a lot of sense to move to the people who have the same mindset, probably the most conservative part of New York at this point.
I certainly had an experience of wanting to distance myself from anything Russian which existed. Just, I guess, immigration trauma, I think, makes you do that in any case. Just wanting to also experience different things and meet other people. But yeah, I think for quite a while, I really didn't want to have to do with anything to do with anything Russian. But then I am connected to Russia through my work at the Calvert Journal. I mean, Russia and other countries of the post-communist area, if I'm allowed to call it like that, just to make it quicker. But yeah, so basically I had to still be connected to Russia through my work. And I kind of did it mostly for work's sake, not particularly in my personal life. In my personal life, I would still kind of try to minimize that. But then I would say, as much as it is healing to take this break from it, then it is actually quite healing to return to it when you can, because otherwise it's quite like big part of you, like family and all of the past experiences. And I have quite like complex heritage, because my dad is actually from Chechnya, and I am aware that being queer, I will never be able to like maybe access some parts of my family history, but I still choose to like acknowledge them. And funnily enough, for me, like actively coming out and starting to work with LGBTQ plus issues, that really connected me to Russia actually yet again, because I met Russian queer people. So even though lots of them, some of them I met in London, some of them online or through work, and that actually gave me that connection to Russia, which is much more fruitful and productive and meaningful than anything else, than even might be more than to some parts of my family. You know, it's because it is something which I create for myself, and also it just like kind of connecting on a level which allows you to understand something deeper about yourself and the culture, and that's been really great.
Great, thank you so much. Ala, would you like to comment on this before we shift to topic 2? You can say yes or no.
Well, I don't know. I have also such an experience of actually moving and living in another country for several years, but then I came back and it wasn't related to my being LGBTIQ. So I'm not sure that it's relevant, but I would just maybe while Anastasia was talking, I also, well, I can relate to what you said, and I kind of agree that it is, at some point, it is a similar experience for all the people who moved to another country. Like I also had this for the first year, I think, while I was living in another country. Like I didn't want to talk to anyone from Russia or meeting any people from diaspora, because I thought, like, what's the point? Like I'm in another country, so what's the point of trying to talk to people from Russia if I left Russia? But yeah, other than that, I don't have any similar experiences, so I guess.
Great, thank you all for your answers for that. We're gonna move to the second topic in the sake of time.
Great, so for our second topic, we will be discussing judgment and alienation within different parts of the Russian LGBTQ plus community. And to start this topic, our question will be, have you experienced judgment or criticism from within different parts of the global Russian LGBTQ plus community? This could be caused by misunderstandings between diaspora and in-country communities, regional and urban perspectives, or between activists and academic communities. Let's see. Ala, would you like to begin this conversation?
Or anyone who's...
Yeah, sure. I'm sorry. I just pressed the wrong button. Well, I was thinking about it, and I think I can't remember any instance of criticism from LGBT, well, from Russian LGBT community outside Russia, but I can say that I have quite a lot of experience of criticism from fellow activists from other Russian LGBTIQ organizations and people who are not activists, actually, for our, well, my personal and of my organization, like our, I don't know, view on things, and maybe our excessively positive outlook, probably, and at different gatherings and forums for activists, I've heard a lot of criticism about this, I don't know, this attitude, like, why are you all happy and positive if it's so awful in here? And why are you writing about or posting or even interviews about good things when there are so many bad things? Like, why? And well, I guess this is the main criticism that we get. And for example, I don't know, when we publish some news about something good that happened, some maybe events and festival, or even some legal cases that were won, and that there are always much more negative comments than positive ones, and people saying that, yeah, of course, okay, you won this case, but how many cases were lost, and why do you even bother talking about it? So I guess that, yeah, but I never got it from anyone from outside the country, or from any fellow activists on international level.
Yeah, I can pick it up talking about different levels. So the first level being in Russia, you always under fire, being an academic openly queer, nobody supported you, never ever happened in my lifetime. From the activist perspective, a lot of misunderstanding within the community, because the activist community in Russia is very small. The relatively large amount of those who identify as queer or gays, they always closeted, or they behind the curtain, and they always criticize those who try to do something, like Allah or myself or LGBT network. They always say, why are you doing that? You just provoke the ultra-right. You're trying to project on us. You're trying to destroy us. That's why we don't have any out stars, which is weird, because we know the pop culture. If tomorrow somebody will say, I'm gay and I'm singer, that will change the public and shift public opinion. That's why we have that problem. Here in the United States, the most critic which I ever heard was from queer community, from the Russian queer community. When we started Brighton Beach Pride in 2017, the most buckets of shit came from gays. Came from gays who live in Brighton Beach, and they kind of try to reproduce that Russian situation. They sit there, oh, we're open here, we go to restaurants, everybody knows that. It's not the point. It's not the point. You live in Brighton Beach and they know that you're gay. They know, but they tolerate you. They do not accept you. So, and that the biggest problem. And also we have a political cleavage. We have a political division within, or cultural division, because, for example, Rus LGBT is a multicultural organization. We have people from all over former Soviet Union. And we have a lot of political battles. So some Russians, they believe they're kind of imperial, you know, that imperial status quo. They believe still that Russian Empire was the biggest one and we conquer everyone. And they undermine Ukrainians, they undermine Belarusian, and they believe that they're big brother. And all of the republics should be thankful and grateful to Russia for kind of hosting them, right? So that's so many things. And religious aspect, for example, as I was talking about Muslim, so we have a lot of problems with that. We have a lot of problems with anti-Semitism, for example. So there is a lot of different angles, which is not related necessarily to queer. They're related to the general view of human nature, which Russia, for example, has endured during the Empire or Soviet era, right? So that's why we have many problems within the community. And unfortunately, the biggest enemy of ourselves is ourselves, right? So, and what we try to do to educate public, to try to talk to them and to try to see another perspective. I'm not even mentioning transgender issues, intersex issues, people of color, BLM, because that's the totally, and unfortunately, I will say that we have around 50% of people who are identified as LGBTQ who supported Trump and his policies, even being undocumented immigrants or just asylum seekers. So there is no logic attached. It's just the way how they used to think and still trying to project that those, you know, ambitions.
I can add a little bit to that. I can recall personally 2 instances when I was heavily criticized by Russian queer community. First one was when I came out as a gay person in Dagestan, which is a very specific part of Russia because it's Muslim, it's collectivistic, and everybody knows everyone. And by coming out, you're kind of like endangering your family. It's a disgrace to them, and everybody knows that, and shame on them. So I was criticized for like putting that weight on my family by several queer people I knew from Dagestan. There are not that many of them. They all are closeted. Some of them are even married to, like, I don't know, girls maybe. Yeah, 3 guys, so 2 of them are married to girls, and they just, I don't know, it's another big issue. They just they're doing everything they can to maintain that appearance of like normality, and basically giving up on everything they could have as human beings, by giving up on what they deserve. And another instance was when I started going, when we launched, my husband Felix, he has a YouTube channel, and we tried to be open. We tried to discuss like issues that we were concerned about. They were related to politics and LGBTQ in Russia, and not only in Russia. And we were criticized for not supporting Putin, for example. And I was like, how can you support someone who was responsible for, you know, propaganda law? But I feel like many of these issues are rooted in in politics and in political system, in a 75 years long Soviet experiment, because people don't have the experience of involvement in political life, and they don't know how institutions are supposed to work. They have no idea how like separation of power exists, why it's important. You know, it's just the idea of being engaged, the idea of being responsible for your own life and for the lives of those close to you. I think this is something that I struggle with, and as we started participating in marches in Pride and Beach Pride, we faced some criticism for that too, because people were like, you were living in Russia and you didn't like do much of that, but now that when it's safe for you, you are going out on streets and you're doing it there. Like, of course it's easy to be brave in New York, why didn't you do that in Russia? I mean, maybe there is some part of truth in that, but I didn't do it personally because actually I did a couple of times, but I didn't do it more because I mean, I was a different level of self-acceptance and in different mental space. So it's a personal thing. But you know, yeah, there is a lot of judgment, and it's hard to like, I don't know, to process all of that and to try to manage and somehow keep going on. It's hard. It takes a lot of energy.
Great. I would like maybe one panelist to answer a follow-up to that question. I'm looking more at organizational level. How do you think, as community leaders or leaders of your organization, you can effectively combat these moments of internal strife or disorganization within the greater community? I mean, you're working with a very diverse LGBTQ plus community from different, you know, historical, ethnic, religious backgrounds. And do you see a benefit at sort of forming a greater understanding on an organizational level? If I could get just one person really quickly.
I will think, Anastasia, if you want to answer that question.
I don't think I'm the right person for it though, because I work with a really specific narrow niche, which is just like the creative community. So I think it's just more up to one of you.
Okay, I just will conclude that it's very tough, and to face our own fears, it's the most difficult and challenging. And what we're trying to do within the RUSA through different educational events, social events, bringing speakers, trying to show the variety of different identities and lives outside our box, Pandora box. And it's hard, and sometimes you try to give up. You want to give up because we're doing voluntarily. It's not like a paid positions, right? And sometimes it's frustrating, but it's only the persistence and determination, because I've seen for the last 6 years that the picture has changed, and we've been very successful in certain areas. And as a professor, for example, I always would say, if you have 100 students or 100% of your students, you teach queer, gender, whatever. If 2 or 3 students, after all, come to you and say that they thank you for the lecture and they learn something, it's already some kind of product. It's already a result. So do not be perfectionists. Do not expect that every single person has to like you. It's not how the life works. That's why it's only the very difficult labor and work throughout the challenges. And that's kudos to everyone who is in this field.
Great, thank you. We're now gonna go to our third topic for the panel. Kyle, if you'd like to start.
Great. So for our next topic, we will be discussing connectedness of Russian LGBTQ+ communities and the potential for collaboration of these communities. And the question we'll start off with is, what collaborations have you or your organization participated in that have been helpful in furthering Russian LGBTQ+ activism? So for this question, I'm particularly interested in Anastasia's answer and maybe Alla. Anastasia, you mentioned that you have some close ties with LGBTQ+ activists and artist communities. So would you like to start by talking about some of those?
Yeah, sure. So basically, yeah, I do two kind of jobs. I work at the Calvert Journal as a, I do like a lot of things there, but one of my specialities is doing content, is curating the Russia Z project, which is a separate project about creativity and art and other cool new things from the Russian new generation. And in that project, I really try to focus a lot on LGBTQ+ people as well, and art which comes from them, activism which comes from them, any innovations which comes from them. And of course, it hugely helps to raise awareness that, I mean, first of all, it exists, and second of all, that Russian queer experience is not limited to violence and oppression, but also there is some kind of agency and creativity and other, you know, basically we exist as people and we also do cool stuff, and we have lives which are have more dimensions than just suffering from what's happening politically. And I'm doing similar thing with my project Russian Queer Revolution, which is which I'm not really active with at the moment, but generally it's basically creating sort of a collective picture of Russian queer creativity and a visual archive of it in these years we living through. So that is more, I guess, about representation and giving some kind of shared identity to us as Russian queer people. And of course, it's not, doesn't mean I try to represent everyone. It's about like creative interpretation rather than sort of the real picture. I think why it's important is, first of all, because I think it has an empowering impact on people in Russia, because when they see that their work can be appreciated and they're just celebrated by people who like them in other countries. This is a celebration which sometimes they can't get in Russia. Also, that could lead to like collaboration or helping them applying for funding or applying for other things which they could get from abroad and can't get in Russia. And generally, I think just things like fundraising, for instance, internationally, it I think has big potential, and sometimes it works pretty well, because like I did a small fundraising campaign for T Action, the trans charity based in St. Petersburg, and that's basically, you know, £5 or $5. It's like not that much, but you know, if it's a lot of people and then you convert it into Russian money, it's actually, it can on the ground and can make a big difference. So even initiating these little things can be really helpful, engaging people from around the world. It has big potential, I think. So.
Yeah, I'd like to well, to continue this topic of fundraising, and well, I just remembered, well, we have a friend in Berlin who also, like, I think for the last 2 or 3 years, for his birthday, he posts on his Facebook page that, okay, if you want to wish me happy birthday, you can donate to Resource Center in Ekaterinburg, my hometown. And it's also, yeah, like 5 or 10 euros, and it's not much for people living in Berlin, but it's, yeah, converted to Russian money, it's quite, it can be quite a significant sum. So yeah, this is definitely one of the ways of supporting each other, probably. And talking about collaborations, we haven't yet had any like joint project with any foreign organization, but we do collaborate a lot with LGBT organizations all over Russia, and also different non-LGBT NGOs and journalists and media outlets and businesses in Yekaterinburg and in our region. And we well, talking about other organizations in Russia, we exchange speakers, and in 2020 there were a lot of online events in which we could participate, or we organized and we invited speakers from other regions, other LGBT organizations with other experiences, and what's happening in Yekaterinburg. We do work a lot with journalists and media, and to further the representation of LGBT community in our region, and we try to to talk about different aspects of LGBT agenda, and not only rights or rights violation or some assaults or some negative news, but a lot about positive news as well. And so yeah, and this is one of the most important things in my personal work and in the work of our organization, is making LGBT people, LGBT community, at least in our city, much more visible. Yeah, and also we try to participate in many city events, like open public talks or panel discussions. And we are, me and my colleagues are regularly invited to some of these events as open LGBT people who can contribute. So this is also what we do in terms of collaborations.
Thank you. And Leo, I was about to say, Lyosha or Ezra, would you like to talk about Rusa LGBT's collaborations and connections?
Yeah, I just very briefly, because we are nationwide, we're American-based organization, right? But we are not global, but we are connected to Russian-speaking LGBTIQ communities in different countries. So in Berlin, it's Kvartira, in Britain, in Netherlands, we just established, helped them to promote the network of people who were persecuted in Caucasus, and particularly in Chechnya, that special network. We've been working a lot with Russian activists from LGBT network, from Ukraine, from Belarus, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan. So we've been trying to bring those people even to the Pride events before COVID started. But also we are not only connected with nonprofit and community organizations, we're trying to engage into the political agenda within the country to help immigrants, and to help people who are marginalized. That's why we are more like leaning to the left in terms of our activism. We are connected with the American organizations like Queer Nation, ACT UP, a different organizations, but we also negotiate with city government agencies, with nation government agencies to kind of ease. It's very hard. It's not so easy, but we're trying very hard. And we got lucky because we have good friends who, for example, last year, like 2 years ago, they from Britain, they gave us money, and we were able to give this money out to people who suffered from COVID consequences in 2020. So we were lucky to get 17,000, and we just spent it on the people who were suffering. But sometimes we asked by Russian activists, for example, HIV Project, to post something and to help them with the fundraising. So it's a very bulk of work, and of course we're always looking for something else. But we are like couple of us, not a lot of people. That's why we're not good in fundraising. I will tell you, we're not good in fundraising because we have to be constantly involved as a professional staff rather than being a volunteer. But I really appreciate all of our partners across the globe.
Great. And then briefly, so talking about sort of international collaborations and connections, I'd be interested in hearing each of your perspectives on the question of, do diaspora communities have a responsibility, you can speak generally or from an individual perspective, to support LGBTQ plus movements within Russia?
I mean, I can say, I'm talking for myself, but I think absolutely yes. Just because whoever is, I think it's obviously a personal choice, but whoever is the most privileged and in the safest conditions has the responsibility to be accountable also for those who are in a less privileged position and who might not be able to speak as openly. That's what that's a principle I use for myself. And that's why I try to be open and outspoken about like my own identity and other issues, just because I am just privileged enough to be in the situation I am in. And that's like the absolute least I can do, really.
Well, I'd like to continue. And well, I actually think that well, they don't have a responsibility or a duty. It's not a question of duty. And I think that everybody has a choice, and it's like everybody's choice to do whatever to support or not to support. But talking about maybe, yeah, like responsibilities, I think that it's maybe not being critical and not devaluing what LGBT activists in Russia do and what LGBT movement in Russia in general does, because from my experience, we sometimes get this, like, not us personally, but people who leave Russia and who choose to live a better life outside, and they are kind of, okay, so it's your choice, you have stayed there, then why are you like, what are you complaining about? And what did you expect if you stayed? So I think that this is a thing not to do. So if you don't want to support LGBT activists who stayed in Russia and who actually decided to fight there, it's your choice not to support, but please don't, have respect for what we do and don't criticize.
Yeah, I think I have several, similar view on that, because personally, I do feel some sort of responsibility, because lots of my friends were left behind in Russia when I moved. But at the same time, I don't see it as my duty or responsibility, because I made my choice, I moved, and if they wanted to, they could do the same. But at the same time, I do understand that it's not an easy decision, and I'm trying to support like everyone who is in Russia, or like people who decide to move to US because we are here. We are trying to, I think that was one of the primary like services of RUSA. We're just trying to consult people, give them the information they need, so their adaptation in a new country can be a little less painful or hard, because it's a really difficult process.
I totally agree. I would like to quote one of my closest friends and queer allies, who says, translating Jewish proverb, right? So queer people anywhere, responsible for queer people everywhere. And of course, because we are kind of linked to that culture, it's our personal connection which makes us wanting to help, right? But we, at the same time, as I mentioned in the beginning, because we are not there anymore, we are more focused on people who are already here in the United States. But of course, we support the work of those brave people in Russia or Ukraine and Belarus. And in any capacity, we would like to continue supporting them. But our major task here to make sure that people who come in here, who are trying to resettle, they kind of have the information and have some resources. But personally, for me, it's like an intelligence motto that we always will be responsible for people, because that's our spirit, that's our nature. And if we weren't that way, we will not be in the activism at all or in volunteering roles. So I guess it's something trying to help others, we try to help ourselves. Selfishly, but positively selfishly. So that's what, unfortunately, a lot of people within the diaspora in different countries do not understand. They think that we are doing that for ourselves, for our own sake, but it could be projected on other communities as well. That's why I think if you can help, but even by introducing someone to another one, not even in money way, so please do that, because that's the human nature. And if we do not stand up for ourselves, who is going to do that? That's Russian, actually. Russians here, they always think that somebody will come and give them everything. So that's the misconception and misunderstanding of civil society and grassroots campaign.
Great, thank you for all your answers for that section. Very insightful. I'll pass it off to Kyle to start our last topic, so we make sure to have time for Q&A in the end.
Great, so moving on to our last topic. The last topic for discussion will be the benefits and consequences of negative and positive news cycles and the future of the Russian LGBTQ plus movement. So the question will be, what are the benefits and consequences of having a predominantly negative news cycle surrounding Russia's LGBTQ plus community? And how does this impact growth and support for the movement? When we spoke, Alla, you had some interesting opinions regarding this topic. So if you would like, I invite you to begin this discussion.
Oh, did I? I have probably kind of radical opinion on this, but I do think that there is, a lot of negativity in covering LGBT agenda in Russia and within the community and people. But I think that it's like, it can be related to any topic and any area of life. Like, people do remember easily negative information rather than positive. With LGBT agenda is the same. Like, people concentrate more on negative pieces of news, and when there is something positive, they either don't notice it, or they also try to, well, as I said before, they try to say, oh, okay, so this is one positive news out of like 100 negative ones, even though it's not true. And so if we talk about consequences for the movement and for the community in general, well, I think that the main consequence is that people are afraid and are unwilling to join the movement, and even like people, well, some people maybe drop out of activism, or other people, they are afraid of even helping, even anonymously. They kind of, we've heard this, like, people say, okay, we understand what we do, maybe it's a good thing, but please don't like associate us with you, and we won't even donate anything to you, because if someone finds out, we will have problems. Or people who read news about some assaults or some other more negative stuff, and they're afraid of, I don't know, leaving their homes and saying that, okay, so if I wear a rainbow badge or something, I will be beaten up or something. And this is not personal experience of these people. It's just because they have been like overwhelmed with all of this negative information. So that's why what we are doing a lot is talking to the media and to the journalists and explaining to them that it's important to also publish positive news.
I mean, I can add to that a little bit. Outside my friends in Moscow who run the magazine called Открытие or Ozien. I don't know if you know it. It's like an independent magazine about Russian queer culture, which they started in 2018. And the whole premise of that was basically to show that, as they said, that we are not just suffering, that there is other things which happen in our lives as queer people in Russia, which are also there and which deserve attention, which are like certain types of activism or parties or artists or photographers or just like beautiful people existing. And I think that I can't say per se what kind of impact it had on the community on the ground, but judging by what's happening online, I think it's definitely allowed particularly creative people to be a little bit more open, because it gave them that audience to which appreciates them. And I think generally I always think about the younger generation, like people who are growing up at the moment, who are, let's say, 15, 16 in Russia, realizing they're gay or queer or trans, and they do need some positive things to see which come from their own country. And I think that's so important, to give them just someone to look up to, or someone to see on social media and realize that it's people like them, and that people like them are not only those people who get beaten up on the news. And I think this is why positive things are so important.
Can I just add a very brief thing, is about the importance of positive news and positive information from faraway regions of Russia that are outside the central part and Moscow and St. Petersburg, because many people who live farther from the central big cities, they don't see any positive news about LGBT community in their region. And they do see this positive news about Moscow and St. Petersburg, and maybe sometimes Ekaterinburg. And yes, this OZIN, they did a great job. They are doing a great job. But like the majority of information that they publish is still about the two capitals. And so when we meet, when I hear about young people, yes, they want to be open, and they understand everything about themselves, and they want a different life for them. But they think that this life is only possible in Moscow and in St. Petersburg, because they say, okay, so I live in some small town or in some faraway region, and in our city, like there are no gay people, or nobody will ever understand me, and I am afraid of saying that I'm LGBT or queer in my city. But when I grow up, I will go to Moscow, St. Petersburg, or to Europe, and there I will be able to live. And this is something that also needs changing, I think, because it's not actually true that it's possible to be LGBT only in Moscow or in St. Petersburg.
Great,
But
thank you.
it's quite hard to find though, because in my experience, we did like a few at Calvert, we did a few projects, like a few editorials, and when we would look for people who would be open to be photographed or interviewed, and it is just harder to find people outside from Moscow and St. Petersburg sometimes. I think partly due to people are not as willing to be open, partly due because our connections are not good enough. And I think that's something we can all work on.
It's harder, but it's not impossible.
Yeah, I do believe that too, I agree.
All right, great. So this is the finish of our discussion portion. There's so many great Q&As that have come in, and I want to make sure to get time to get to all of them. So thank you for the great and lively discussion. I think we covered some interesting topics here. Hopefully our listeners tuning in have learned something new. So I'll pass it off to Kyle to do some Q&A questions for you guys.
Great, so we'll do Q&A now. We currently have 6 questions. If you have any lingering questions, any of their other audience members, please feel free to throw them in the Q&A posting section. So we will start out with a question from Alex Marciniak, who's a doctoral candidate in Slavic languages and literatures at Michigan. Hi, Alex. Says, my question for your panel is about language. As you have all discussed, queer identities are different across Russia. I wonder if different terms are used as well. For instance, is queer used more in Moscow LGBTQIA+ communities, but not used as much in Dagestan, for instance? Any insights about language and terminology would be appreciated.
I can go first, I think, on this one. You know, I have an interesting experience with that, because when I was trying to come out and open up about my gay identity to my parents, to my mom, there was a problem because Russian is not my native language. My native language is like is a tongue dialect of one of the Dagestani languages, and it is spoken only in a town of about like in a village of about like a couple of thousands of people. And I was like, how do I tell my mom that I'm gay? I was like, I mean, there is a word for males who practice sex with other male partners, but it has like extremely negative connotation. And I was like, and I had to say that, you know, mom, I don't like girls, you know. So basically that was my solution, because there was no word for it. And it was really hard. My language was like one of the main barriers that made my coming out experience so much harder. If we are speaking about Russia in general, I think the terms that are used in Russia are less inclusive. Most of the people know who gay is, who lesbians are. Trans are maybe a little less. Queer isn't that common, but I don't know. I think Ala or Anastasia can tell you a little more about that. Yeah.
I think the language-wise, we don't have, and it's not only with your, when I was coming out, we didn't have the word gay. I just was telling that I don't like girls, right? So, and you try to project, but even in Russian language, in academic language, we do not have the professional definition of queer or even gay. So they try to use minorities, sexual minorities, which is absolutely disgusting. I hate that word. So, but that's the reality. And even in the English language, queer for a lot of generations still sounds very peculiar, like eccentric and something very not acceptable. So that's why the language-wise, we do not have an established vocabulary. But I guess, as Alice said, for the younger generation, it's much easier to identify with because of social media and that international context and global platforms.
Yeah, but I'd say that there is also a big difference between like big cities and smaller towns and like far away regions. And it's true that the people from big cities, and well, especially those who are closer to activist circles, they have a more progressive vocabulary. And people who live in smaller towns or like in farther regions, they still use the vocabulary like from the 90s. To talk about themselves and their identities. So yeah, there is this difference and this kind of struggle of understanding each other sometimes. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And then I'm looking at the time here, so we'll probably get to about 2 more questions. I will put my email in the chat. If people that have asked questions want them answered, feel free to email them to me, and then I can send them through the panelists. But so Kyle, if you want to take away with the next question.
I think we might be able to get more than 2. Well, we'll see.
Maybe we can squeeze them, maybe like 1 response per question, and we can try to get through a lot of them.
That sounds good. So our next one is from Dylan, who says, thank you all very much for presenting today. Здравствуйте, мои друзья из Russia. My question pertains to what Anastasia had mentioned about there being an underlying irony in Russia, given the societal attitudes toward the LGBTQ plus community there, and yet there being traditions integral to the collective culture that are really, really quite queer. Could the panelists provide some examples of this queerness to which the general population can, for some reason, pay a blind eye?
It's just hard to come up with something concrete.
Yeah, it's a little hard, but you know, before I came out, I traveled to Dagestan with my then boyfriend Felix, and we slept in the same bed, and no one had any questions about that. It was like, okay, you came from Moscow with your friend, and you're gonna sleep in same room in the same bed. Oh, fine, no problem. Like, and I was like, how could you not know? How could you like not see that something is a little different here? But you know.
It was not significant in Russia. So to a certain extent, when we start politicizing and opening about the queer identity, something like that you described never was a problem. I had a lot of encounters with my cousin. We slept together. We were naked together in front of our relatives. Nobody will use the word because we didn't have that paradigm of hypersexuality, right? Or that sexualizing of identities. So I guess that's the biggest problem now. It's just like we connected to the political agenda, strategic agenda, ideological agenda, rather than human identity.
I mean, I just have to mention quickly that that idea partly came from academic Vlad Strukov, who is currently writing a book on Russian queer culture. Actually, in an interview, he told me that idea that basically Russian culture is queer, but LGBTQI plus questions are perceived as Western liberal agenda, and that's the whole schizophrenic divide, which basically like prevents us from advancing forward in many ways. So I can let you know what his name is. I mean, it's Vlad Strukov, but if you ever have questions, I can email you like more details about that.
Correct. And I think Alwa has a question that she'd like to answer. Whose name is it? Or do you want to read off the question yourself?
I can. Well, there is Arina Vlasova, first-year graduate student in Greece. And her question is, do you have any examples of LGBTQ plus activists in Russia trying to support queer teenagers in spite of the propaganda law? And what do you think is the best way to do it under such restrictive conditions? So I can say that me personally and our organization, we do work with LGBT plus teenagers, and we provide them legal and psychological support, and also they can come to our community center. And we are, in Ekaterinburg, we are among the few community centers that actually let teenagers come. And also Russian LGBT Network, they also work with teenagers and they provide counseling and they talk openly about working with teenagers and the importance of supporting LGBT plus teenagers because actually they are they are the most vulnerable probably members of LGBT plus community. And last year, Resource Center and Russian LGBT Network, we held a survey of bullying in Russian schools based on sexual orientation and gender identity, and we are now in the process of processing the results, and I think we're going to publish it somewhere in late spring. And this was a really very important project for all of us, and I think for LGBT community in Russia in general. So yeah, thank you for letting me answer this question, because I think it's extremely important that this propaganda law does not actually, well, it makes work a little bit more difficult, but I think people are more afraid of it than it is really. And there are organizations and activists who work with LGBT teenagers.
Great, and thank you all again for your excellent panel. I think we're at the end of our time here. I'd be remiss if I didn't thank Ford and Crease for putting together the US-Russia Future Leaders initiative that's allowed me and Kyle to meet such interesting and inspiring people. Thank you for everyone that's tuning in today. And a special thanks to Dr. John Chorchari, Zaritsky, Von Moltke, and Liz Malinkin, who's the coordinator at CREES, that has been with us every step of the way on this project. So I'll pass it over to Professor Von Moltke if you'd like to say a final goodbye to everyone.
I would, and obviously I'd love to say an extended thanks, and I'm sure I speak for many if I say that we could stay in this conversation for quite a bit longer. There's lots still to discuss. There are great questions still out there. I'm just mindful of people's time. I learned a lot just from listening to you. In particular about the issue of, how, to what extent we can generalize and how we have to be careful with generalizations. I think that's where we started and ended in a certain way, which made me think of two things, and I'll be very, very brief. One is the increased importance of translation. And I just want to acknowledge and thank you for us to be able to participate in this conversation in English for those of us who don't speak Russian. So thank you for that. But also for translation, cultural translation between each other, that becomes all the more important. And I heard you talking in many ways, in many interesting ways, about what it means to translate experience or to translate knowledge or histories into other cultural contexts. And by the same token, I found that when generalizations are difficult, sometimes they're really important, and they become political rallying points that we generalize or essentialize even. At the same time, that's the moment when the specificity of experience becomes really important. And I'm very, very grateful to all of you, those who came to share your specific experience, but also to Kyle and Rachel for taking up this this cause and bringing us all together, because I think these become the bases for a new kind of solidarity. Even if you can't generalize, you can be in solidarity with one another, and that's something I really felt in this panel. So this was really exciting, and I'm sure it's just a door that's opening up to other conversations. And I want to thank all of you, and of course all the participants, for being here. And unfortunately, there's no good way in webinars for the panelists to hang out afterwards. So we're going to have to end it and we'll be gone, but hopefully we can connect in other ways. So thank you all very, very much.